Ulysses S. Grant was a determined soldier and reluctant politician who saved the Union and became America's 18th president. Ulysses S. Grant, the Civil War general and United States President, was born in Point Pleasant, Ohio on April 27, 1822. He came from modest circumstances. His father, Jesse Grant, was a tanner and businessman. The boy was christened Hiram Ulysses Grant, but he would later change his name. Grant's childhood was unremarkable in southern Ohio. He was a quiet boy who showed little interest in his father's tanning business. He had a natural way with horses. Young Grant could handle the most difficult animals with ease. His father recognized his son's potential and sought an appointment for him to the United States Military Academy at West Point. When Grant arrived at West Point in 1839, there was an error in his registration. The congressman who nominated him listed his name as Ulysses Simpson Grant using his mother's maiden name. Grant accepted the change and the name stuck. He was called Sam by his classmates after his new initials US for Uncle Sam. Grant was an average student at West Point. He excelled in mathematics and horsemanship but showed little enthusiasm for military discipline. He graduated in 1843, ranking 21st in a class of 39. Grant hoped the academy would close before he graduated. He had no great passion for military life. But duty called and Grant reported for service. He was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the 4th Infantry Regiment. In 1844, Grant met Julia Dent, the sister of his West Point roommate. Julia was the daughter of a Missouri plantation owner. Grant fell deeply in love with her. They became engaged before he left to fight in the Mexican-American War. The war with Mexico began in 1846 and Grant saw extensive combat. He served under General Zachary Taylor and later General Winfield Scott. Grant distinguished himself in battle despite his private opposition to the war. He believed the conflict was unjust, an aggressive war to expand slavery. But he was a soldier and he did his duty. Grant participated in nearly every major engagement of the war. He showed remarkable bravery at Monterrey and Mexico City. His commanding officers noted his courage under fire. The Mexican War taught Grant valuable lessons about military strategy and logistics. He learned how to move troops quickly and supply armies in hostile territory. These lessons would serve him well in the future. When the war ended in 1848, Grant returned home and married Julia Dent. They would have 4 children together. Julia became his anchor, his constant support through triumph and tragedy. Grant's peacetime military career was difficult and lonely. He was stationed at remote outposts far from his family. In 1852, he was sent to Fort Vancouver in the Oregon Territory. Julia and the children could not accompany him. The separation devastated Grant. He was lonely and depressed. He began drinking to cope with the isolation. Grant tried various business ventures to earn extra money to bring his family west. Every venture failed. His commanding officers grew concerned about his drinking. In 1854, Grant resigned from the army under pressure. The circumstances were murky, but alcohol played a role. Grant returned to his family in Missouri, a failure at age 32. He had no prospects, no career, no money. The next 7 years were the darkest of Grant's life. He tried farming on land Julia's father gave them. Grant called the property hardscrabble and the name was fitting. He worked the land himself alongside the few slaves Julia had inherited. Grant was deeply uncomfortable with slavery. In 1859, he freed the one slave he personally owned, a man named William Jones. This was a remarkable act because Grant desperately needed money and could have sold Jones for $1,000. But Grant chose freedom over profit. The farm failed and Grant moved his family to St. Louis. He tried selling real estate and failed. He tried collecting debts and failed. He pawned his watch to buy Christmas presents for his children. Grant's father finally offered him a job as a clerk in the family leather goods store in Galena, Illinois. Grant accepted the humiliating position. He was nearly 40 years old, working for his younger brothers. He seemed destined for obscurity. Then in April 1861, the Civil War began with the Confederate attack on Fort Sumter. Grant immediately volunteered his services. He helped recruit and train Illinois volunteers. Grant knew this was his chance for redemption. The governor of Illinois appointed him colonel of the 21st Illinois Infantry Regiment. Grant quickly distinguished himself as a leader. He was calm under pressure. He had a gift for seeing the essential elements of any military situation. Within months, Grant was promoted to brigadier general. He was given command of the District of Southeast Missouri with headquarters in Cairo, Illinois. Grant's first military action was to seize Paducah, Kentucky before Confederate forces could occupy it. This bold move secured Union control of the mouth of the Tennessee River. In February 1862, Grant launched his first major offensive. He attacked Fort Henry on the Tennessee River and Fort Donelson on the Cumberland River. These Confederate strongholds guarded the water routes into the heart of the South. Fort Henry fell quickly to Union gunboats. Grant then marched his army overland to Fort Donelson. The Confederate commander asked for terms of surrender. Grant's reply became famous. He demanded unconditional and immediate surrender. The Confederates had no choice but to comply. The victory at Fort Donelson was the Union's first major success of the war. It opened Tennessee to invasion. Grant became a national hero overnight. The newspapers called him Unconditional Surrender Grant. President Lincoln promoted him to Major General. But Grant's triumph was short-lived. In April 1862, Confederate forces surprised Grant's army at Shiloh in Tennessee. The first day of battle was a disaster for the Union. Grant's forces were nearly driven into the Tennessee River. Grant rallied his men and refused to retreat. He received reinforcements overnight and counterattacked the next morning. The Union won the battle, but at a terrible cost. More than 13,000 Union soldiers were killed or wounded. The carnage shocked the nation. Grant's critics demanded his removal. They accused him of being drunk during the battle. They said he was caught by surprise and nearly destroyed the army. Newspapers called for his dismissal. Political enemies lobbied Lincoln to fire Grant. But Lincoln refused. When advisors told the president that Grant drank too much, Lincoln reportedly said, "Find out what brand of whiskey Grant drinks and send a barrel to my other generals." Lincoln recognized what others missed. Grant was a fighter. He did not retreat. He did not quit. He kept attacking. Lincoln needed generals who would fight, and Grant would fight. Grant spent the next year trying to capture Vicksburg, Mississippi. The city sat on high bluffs overlooking the Mississippi River. It was the key to controlling the river and splitting the Confederacy in two. Grant tried multiple approaches. He tried to bypass the city by digging canals. He tried to approach from the north through the swamps and bayous. Nothing worked. Finally, in the spring of 1863, Grant made a daring decision. He would march his army down the west side of the Mississippi, then cross below Vicksburg and attack from the south and east. It was a risky plan. Grant would be cutting himself off from his supply lines. His army would have to live off the land in enemy territory. Many thought it was madness. But Grant trusted his instincts. In April 1863, he began the campaign. Union gunboats ran past the Vicksburg batteries at night. Grant marched his army down the Louisiana shore. They crossed the river at Bruinsburg, Mississippi. Grant then moved quickly inland. He defeated Confederate forces at Port Gibson, Raymond, and Jackson. He won 5 battles in 3 weeks. Grant then turned west and drove the Confederate army back into Vicksburg's fortifications. He laid siege to the city. For 6 weeks, Grant's army surrounded Vicksburg. The Confederate soldiers and civilians inside slowly starved. On July 4, 1863, Vicksburg surrendered. The Mississippi River was now under Union control. The Confederacy was cut in half. The victory at Vicksburg, combined with the Union victory at Gettysburg 3 days earlier, marked the turning point of the war. Grant was the most successful general in the Union Army. In October 1863, Lincoln gave Grant command of all Union forces in the Western Theater. Grant immediately went to Chattanooga, Tennessee, where a Union army was trapped and under siege. Grant opened a supply line called the Cracker Line and saved the army from starvation. He then launched attacks on the Confederate positions surrounding the city. In a spectacular assault, Union troops charged up Missionary Ridge and routed the Confederate Army. The victory at Chattanooga opened the way for Sherman's invasion of Georgia. In March 1864, Lincoln promoted Grant to lieutenant general and gave him command of all Union armies. Grant was now the highest-ranking officer in the military. Only George Washington had previously held the rank of lieutenant general. Grant moved his headquarters to Virginia to personally direct the campaign against Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. Grant's strategy was simple and brutal. He would attack Lee continuously, never giving the Confederate Army time to rest or regroup. Grant would use the Union superiority in numbers and resources to wear Lee down. In May 1864, Grant launched the Overland Campaign. The two armies clashed in the wilderness, a dense forest in northern Virginia. The battle was a confused nightmare of fighting in thick woods and brush fires. Grant lost more men than Lee, but he did not retreat. Previous Union generals had always withdrawn after fighting Lee. Grant pushed forward. He told his staff, "I propose to fight it out on this line if it takes all summer." The armies fought again at Spotsylvania Courthouse. Again, Grant lost more men than Lee. Again, Grant pushed forward. The campaign continued through Cold Harbor, where Grant ordered a frontal assault that resulted in 7,000 Union casualties in less than an hour. Grant later said he regretted that attack more than any other he ordered. But still, Grant pushed forward. He maneuvered his army south of Richmond and attacked Petersburg, a vital railroad junction. If Petersburg fell, Richmond would fall. Grant laid siege to Petersburg. The siege would last 9 months. Grant extended his lines, gradually stretching Lee's army thinner and thinner. Lee did not have enough men to defend the entire perimeter. While Grant besieged Petersburg, he sent General Sherman to invade Georgia. Sherman captured Atlanta in September 1864. The victory helped Lincoln win re-election. Sherman then marched to the sea, cutting a path of destruction through Georgia and the Carolinas. Grant coordinated the movements of all Union armies. He applied pressure everywhere simultaneously. The Confederacy could not defend on all fronts. Grant's strategy of total war was working. The North's industrial and manpower advantages were overwhelming. In April 1865, Grant finally broke Lee's lines at Petersburg. The Confederate Army abandoned Richmond and fled west. Grant pursued relentlessly. He cut off Lee's escape routes. On April 9, 1865, Lee asked for terms. Grant met Lee at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. The two generals sat in Wilmer McLean's parlor and negotiated the surrender. Grant was generous in victory. He allowed Confederate officers to keep their sidearms. He allowed soldiers who owned horses to keep them for spring planting. He provided rations for Lee's starving army. Grant told his men not to celebrate. He said, "The rebels are our countrymen again." The Civil War was over. The Union was saved. Grant was the most famous man in America. He had won the greatest war in the nation's history. Over 600,000 Americans died in the conflict. Grant's military genius and determination had preserved the United States. After the war, Grant remained in command of the army. He oversaw the early years of Reconstruction. Grant supported civil rights for the freed slaves. He believed the Union victory must result in real freedom and equality. But President Andrew Johnson opposed aggressive Reconstruction policies. Grant found himself caught between Johnson and the Republican Congress. Johnson tried to use Grant for political purposes. Grant grew to distrust and dislike Johnson. In 1868, the Republican Party nominated Grant for president. Grant was reluctant to enter politics. He was a soldier, not a politician. But he felt a duty to serve. His campaign slogan was "Let us have peace." Grant won the election easily. He was inaugurated as president on March 4, 1869, at age 46. Grant was the youngest president elected up to that time. He came to the presidency with no political experience. He had voted only once before in his life. Grant's presidency was marked by both achievements and scandals. He strongly supported Reconstruction and civil rights for African Americans. Grant sent federal troops to the South to protect black voters and suppress the Ku Klux Klan. He signed the 15th Amendment guaranteeing voting rights regardless of race. Grant believed in the equality of all citizens. He appointed African Americans to federal positions. He fought against racial violence and intimidation. But Grant was too trusting of his friends and appointees. His administration was plagued by corruption scandals. The Credit Mobilier scandal involved railroad company fraud. The whiskey ring scandal involved tax evasion by distillers and government officials. Grant's personal secretary was implicated in the whiskey ring. Grant himself was never accused of profiting from corruption, but his reputation suffered. He had poor judgment in selecting advisors. Grant's economic policies were also controversial. He supported hard money and the gold standard. When the Panic of 1873 triggered a severe depression, Grant vetoed inflation relief measures. The depression lasted throughout his second term. Unemployment was widespread. Grant's popularity declined. In foreign policy, Grant had more success. His administration settled the Alabama Claims dispute with Britain. He attempted to annex Santo Domingo, but the Senate rejected the treaty. Grant supported Cuban independence from Spain. He tried to protect American interests abroad while avoiding war. Grant served 2 full terms as president. He declined to run for a third term in 1876, though some urged him to continue. Grant was exhausted by politics and eager to leave Washington. After leaving office in 1877, Grant and Julia embarked on a world tour. They traveled for 2.5 years, visiting Europe, Asia, and Africa. Grant met with kings and emperors. He was celebrated everywhere as the man who saved the American Union. The tour restored Grant's reputation and spirits. When Grant returned to America in 1879, there was talk of nominating him for a third term as president. Grant allowed his name to be put forward at the 1880 Republican Convention. He led on the early ballots but could not secure the nomination. James Garfield eventually won the nomination and the presidency. Grant settled in New York City. He needed to earn money. His savings were modest and he had a family to support. Grant became a partner in a Wall Street investment firm called Grant & Ward. His son was involved in the business. Grant invested all his money in the firm. He believed his partners were honest men. In 1884 the firm collapsed. Grant's partner Ferdinand Ward had been running a Ponzi scheme. All of Grant's money was gone. He was bankrupt at age 62. Grant was devastated and humiliated. He had been swindled by men he trusted. Friends raised money to help the family. Grant was too proud to accept charity. He needed to provide for Julia. Around this time, Grant developed throat cancer from years of smoking cigars. He was in constant pain. Doctors told him he had less than a year to live. Grant decided to write his memoirs to provide financial security for his family. Mark Twain offered to publish the book and promised generous royalty terms. Grant worked frantically to finish the manuscript. He was racing against death. The cancer spread to his tongue and mouth. Grant could barely speak or swallow. He wrote in pencil on pads of paper. He pushed through the pain and exhaustion. Grant's memoirs covered his early life and focused heavily on his Civil War campaigns. The writing was clear, direct, and honest. Grant had a natural talent for prose. He wrote without pretension or self-glorification. Grant finished the manuscript just days before he died. On July 23, 1885, Ulysses S. Grant died at a cottage in the Adirondack Mountains. He was 63 years old. His last words were reportedly, "I am thankful for having been enabled to do so much for my family." Grant's funeral was one of the largest in American history. More than 1.5 million people lined the streets of New York to watch the funeral procession. Presidents and generals marched behind the hearse. Former Confederate generals served as pallbearers alongside Union generals. Grant was buried in a massive tomb overlooking the Hudson River in New York City. Grant's memoirs were published shortly after his death. The book was a critical and commercial success. It sold 300,000 copies and earned nearly $500,000 in royalties for Julia. The memoirs are considered one of the finest military autobiographies ever written. Grant secured his family's future even in death. Ulysses S. Grant's legacy is complex and contested. As a general, he was brilliant. He understood modern warfare. He grasped that wars are won through relentless pressure and superior resources. Grant was willing to accept casualties to achieve victory. He coordinated multiple armies across vast distances. He was the architect of Union victory. As president, Grant was less successful. His administration was marked by scandal, though Grant himself was honest. He supported civil rights and fought against the Klan. But he could not overcome the political and economic challenges of his time. Reconstruction ultimately failed, and African Americans in the South lost the rights Grant tried to protect. Grant's personal life was marked by failure and redemption. He failed at nearly everything before the Civil War. He struggled with alcohol throughout his life. He was swindled and bankrupted in his final years. But Grant never gave up. He always fought back. He redeemed himself through determination and courage. Grant was a man of contradictions. He was a gentle person who became a fierce warrior. He hated slavery but married into a slave-holding family. He was modest and unassuming but commanded vast armies. He was trusting to a fault but learned hard lessons about human nature. Grant's greatest strength was his ability to see what needed to be done and do it. He did not overcomplicate matters. He assessed the situation, made a decision, and acted. When he failed, he tried again. Grant never lost sight of his objective. During the Civil War, his objective was to destroy the Confederate armies and restore the Union. He pursued that goal with single-minded determination. Nothing distracted him. Setbacks did not discourage him. He kept moving forward. Grant understood that wars are won by the side that refuses to quit. He would not quit. Grant's military reputation has grown over time. Modern historians rank him among America's greatest generals alongside Washington and Eisenhower. His Vicksburg campaign is studied as a masterpiece of military art. His coordination of multiple armies in 1864 and 1865 demonstrated strategic genius. Grant revolutionized American warfare. He understood that destroying the enemy's army, not capturing territory, was the key to victory. He grasped the importance of logistics and supply. He used railroads and rivers to move troops and materials. He adapted to changing battlefield conditions. Grant also understood the political dimensions of war. He recognized that Northern public opinion demanded results. He knew Lincoln needed military victories to maintain support for the war. Grant delivered those victories. Grant's presidency is viewed more favorably by recent historians. They credit him with fighting for civil rights during Reconstruction. Grant used federal power to protect African Americans from racial violence. He crushed the Ku Klux Klan in South Carolina. He appointed Black Americans to federal offices. He supported the 15th Amendment. Grant believed the Civil War must result in real equality. He fought for that principle even when it was politically unpopular. But Grant could not overcome the forces of white supremacy in the South. Northern support for Reconstruction waned. The Supreme Court limited federal power to protect civil rights. By the end of Grant's presidency, Reconstruction was failing. The gains of the war years were being rolled back. It would take another century before the civil rights movement achieved what Grant fought for. Grant died believing he had failed his country as president. He was wrong. He had done more than any president between Lincoln and Lyndon Johnson to advance civil rights. His efforts were thwarted by circumstances beyond his control. Ulysses S. Grant was a man who rose from obscurity to save his nation. He was an unlikely hero, a failed businessman who became a great general. He was a reluctant politician who fought for justice. He was a devoted husband and father who sacrificed everything for his family. Grant's life teaches us that failure is not final. Redemption is always possible. Determination and courage can overcome any obstacle. Grant never gave up, and neither should we. He remains an inspiration and a reminder of what Americans can achieve when they refuse to surrender.